It's not easy to find one's true path, and some people only manage to do so in their later years. Unfortunately, by that time, a person may have already made many unpleasant acquaintances, and it can become dangerous. Today, we want to tell the story of vile hypocrisy and malice that led to a tragedy. Joseph Saunier was born in 1955 into a well-respected family of physicians in Shreveport, Louisiana, USA, and from childhood, he wanted to follow in his family's footsteps. He graduated with honors in medical sciences from the University of Baton Rouge in 1976, and then completed his studies at Louisiana State University in Shreveport. While attending university, Joseph worked at Parkland Hospital in Dallas, Texas, where he rose to become the chief resident in his final year of training. He became a pathologist and a partner in a laboratory, which he later sold. At the time of the events described, Dr. Saunier was still employed as the lab's director and was also listed as the chief pathologist for the Covenant Health System in Lubbock, Texas. Dr. Joseph Saunier was a respected and wealthy pathologist, making him quite a catch for any woman. He was a single man, famous, enjoying his freedom, his status, and his wealth. However, it wasn't always this way, as he had married his high school sweetheart Becky at the age of 19. The couple had 2 sons together. Saunier was a fairly strict father, but it paid off. He believed in strict discipline for young boys, and his sons grew up to be responsible and decent men. Initially, the family was doing well, but after 27 years of marriage, Becky fell in love with another man. She honestly told her husband about this, and they eventually divorced. However, Becky's new relationship did not lead to a happy future, as her new lover turned out to be a dangerous man. Sometime after their marriage, he shot her, their dog, and then himself. Fortunately, the children, who were already adults and living separately, were not harmed in this tragedy. Dr. Saunier was shocked by the brutal death of his ex-wife, but he had no idea that his own future would also be tainted with blood. As the years passed, Joseph continued to support his 2 sons. In 2007, he moved from Dallas to Lubbock to start a new life. Joseph planned to continue working while enjoying life, trying things he hadn't yet had the chance to appreciate, such as dancing. He started taking dance lessons, which brought him a lot of joy, especially as it allowed him to meet different women. He didn't give up hope of finding love. Over time, he attempted to form relationships with his dance partners, but nothing worked out. This went on for quite a while until, in July 2011, 57-year-old Joseph met the woman who, as it turned out, would become his destiny. Her name was Tina, a 47-year-old stunning and charming woman, almost 10 years younger than him. Before they met, Rachel had been a high-ranking executive in the NFL for a long time, building a successful career and wanting for nothing. She also had 4 children of her own, all of whom were grown. The couple had many things in common, and it's no wonder they hit it off quickly and fell deeply in love after some time. They spent more and more time together. Rachel's birthday was celebrated in Paris, and then Joseph took her to Los Angeles to introduce her to his family. The pathologist's wealth made it easy to take trips, regardless of their scale or cost. The relationship developed so quickly that the couple began to wish for marriage. At that time, Joseph had no idea that his new lover was a real ticking time bomb and that being with her would turn out to be dangerous. On July 11, 2012, the situation spiraled out of control. A landscaper who had come to the doctor's house to discuss an upcoming renovation called 911. He reported that when he arrived at his client's house to inspect the patio, he couldn't reach the homeowner. However, he noticed the door was open. The landscaper assumed that Joseph simply hadn't heard him. The man entered the house and began calling out for him. The gardener saw chaos inside, and most suspiciously, he noticed a bullet hole in a window near the front door. It all looked like a break-in, and it was worrying. He cautiously continued inside, looking for the homeowner, but found no trace of him. The gardener then made his way to the garage, where he found Dr. Saunier lying in a pool of blood with no signs of life. He had both gunshot and stab wounds on his body. The worker immediately exited the house and called 911. The call came in at 2:48 p.m., and the police quickly dispatched several patrols to the scene. When the officers arrived, they found the crime victim, quickly identified as 57-year-old Joseph Sonier. Paramedics declared the renowned pathologist dead at the scene. This horrific crime took place in one of the calmest, safest, and most prestigious neighborhoods in the city. There was virtually no crime in this area, so the event shook the entire community. The wealthy pathologist had no enemies, and all of his friends and family described him as one of the calmest and kindest people they knew. He belonged to a prestigious profession and had no apparent enemies who would want to harm him. It was immediately clear that this was not a robbery, as nothing had been stolen from the house. However, a window had been broken, and a bottle with a shot-out bottom was found at the scene, which seemed to have been used as an improvised silencer for a gun. Investigators determined that the victim had been dead for some time when he was found. The blood had dried, the body was cold, and rigor mortis had set in. An estimated time of death was established, revealing that the man had died during the night. Crime scene investigators immediately arrived to determine the circumstances of the crime and gather evidence for the investigation. Ample evidence was available, as the attacker appeared to have left plenty behind, showing they were likely not a professional, but rather an amateur. DNA from the bottle, used as a silencer, was collected at the scene, as well as blood samples from 2 people. All of this evidence was sent to the lab for analysis. Neighboring residents reported seeing and hearing nothing suspicious, and there were no surveillance cameras nearby. Investigators deduced that the attacker had entered through the back door, using a large panoramic window that overlooked the backyard, a route favorable for a surprise attack. Inside the dining room, the attacker confronted his victim, which was when shots were fired. The wine bottle was probably used as a silencer at this point, though it didn't work. The doctor seemed to have been alive after that, as blood trails were found along the corridor leading to the garage, where the attacker began stabbing him, ultimately resulting in his death. An autopsy of the victim revealed 5 gunshot wounds and 11 stab wounds. Initially, detectives didn't believe this was a random crime, but they needed to figure out who had done it and why. Naturally, the first people they investigated were the pathologist's family and children, all of whom were in shock. Just 2 years earlier, their mother, Becky, had been shot by her new husband, and now their father had been killed in a similarly brutal manner. It seemed too coincidental for lightning to strike twice in the same family. Joseph's murder was the second devastating blow for the children, following the emotional torment of their biological mother's death. Within 2 years, they found themselves parentless. The brutal killing of Becky had deeply wounded Dr. Sonier, a man who had spent nearly 3 decades of his life with her. He often reminisced about the years they spent together, mourning her loss. Despite his grief, he remained strong and became a pillar of support for his family, handling all the funeral arrangements and covering the expenses, while helping his sons cope with the trauma. Later, the children admitted that it was their father's support that helped each of them overcome the pain. The sons of the victim had no idea who would want to harm their father. He was a rock for many people, not just for the family, but also for his friends and colleagues. He was a charming, likable man with a fortune estimated at around $12 million, yet he never flaunted his wealth, preferring to stay humble. All of this made him one of the most desirable bachelors of his age in the city. Naturally, many women were attracted to him, and this became particularly noticeable when he started taking dance lessons. Since then, the charismatic millionaire had no shortage of attention from interested women. It was through dancing that he also met his new lover, Rachel, who was readily accepted by the entire family. Rachel was beautiful, cheerful, and fun. After meeting, the couple began to relax together at the best restaurants and private clubs in the city, as well as in more private settings. Joseph spared no effort when it came to his beloved, showering her with gifts. At this point, Rachel was 47 years old and completely enamored with her new partner. Numerous confirmations of her feelings were found, particularly in the many posts on her personal social media pages, where Rachel openly declared her love for the wealthy doctor. This was also confirmed by multiple witnesses, friends, and acquaintances familiar with the couple, who had high hopes for their relationship. Joseph had been single for a long time and hadn't been able to start a new family, but it seemed that now a worthy woman had finally come into his life, and he was ready to marry her. The person closest to the victim was, without a doubt, his girlfriend Rachel, with whom he was inseparable. Naturally, the investigators spoke with her first. She described the deceased as the love of her life and said she could never have imagined something like this happening to him. She was deeply distraught by the events and didn't know what to do. During her conversation with the police, Rachel shared some strange details. She said that in the months leading up to the tragedy, odd things had been happening in the lives of the couple. Joseph seemed to be the victim of stalking, something he had confided to his fiancée about repeatedly. Rachel also mentioned that she herself had once seen a stranger who looked quite eerie standing outside their house on a rainy night, watching the door and windows as if observing them. However, she couldn't see his face clearly. Despite these unsettling events, Rachel said her fiancé tried to turn everything into a joke, seemingly underestimating the seriousness of the situation. Rachel also mentioned that Joseph had received multiple strange calls and threats in the months before his death, which were followed by a series of threatening text messages. After reflecting on the events, Rachel named several individuals she thought might be potential suspects. However, the police initially doubted her suggestions, suspecting that jealousy might have been one possible motive. Thanks to a few witnesses, the police learned that Joseph had been involved with multiple women at the time of his death. This prompted the investigators to ask Rachel if she knew whether her fiancé might have been involved in any extramarital relationships. She responded that she wasn't aware of any such affairs and denied that Joseph would have done anything like that, stating that it wasn't in his character. Joseph's sons also refuted the allegations, insisting that their father was a decent man who would never cheat. Faced with the obvious suspicions of the police, Rachel maintained her innocence. During her next interview, however, she broke down in tears and admitted that she knew several women who might have been involved in the murder. According to Rachel, there were several ex-girlfriends who had continuously harassed the doctor, with the pressure increasing in the months leading up to his death. Joseph had ignored them, but they had continued to bother him, unhappy that he was in a serious relationship with Rachel and preparing for marriage. One of these women was a dance instructor from Florida, who kept calling and texting him, even after Joseph had informed her of his serious relationship with Rachel. Rachel also suspected that a nurse, with whom the pathologist had worked some time ago, might be involved, as she too had been calling and texting him regularly. The third woman was someone with a daughter who had sent a threatening letter to Joseph shortly before the murder, accusing him of abandoning her and her child, which wasn't true. In addition to these women, Rachel was one of the first to point to Thomas Dixon, a plastic surgeon who worked at his private clinic. He specialized in cosmetic treatments and plastic surgery, and his clinic was located in another city. There was a possibility that Dixon had a motive to harm Joseph, as Rachel had been his former lover, and their breakup had been difficult. Thomas and Rachel had met in 2008 when she visited his clinic for Botox injections. Initially, their relationship was friendly, with light flirting, but it soon blossomed into an affair. The doctor began cheating on his wife with Rachel. After a few months, his wife found out and filed for divorce, but this didn't seem to bother the plastic surgeon. He was so deeply in love with Rachel that he divorced his wife, with whom he had been married for about 20 years. Thomas was determined to be with Rachel, and they continued their relationship only to break up again in 2010. Rachel described Thomas as a manipulative man who tried to control everything, including her freedom. He had stalked her for a long time, demanding that she return to him, which prompted Rachel to move away in order to escape him. After considering all the circumstances, Rachel came to believe that her ex, Thomas Dixon, had been the one stalking Joseph in the months leading up to his death. She revealed that the final stage of their relationship had been a nightmare, a roller coaster ride that had taken a serious toll on her. Rachel described her ex as a womanizer who couldn't resist any woman, and she said he tended toward emotional abuse, which led to their breakup. The main reason, she explained, was that Thomas was always lying, pretending to be something he wasn't. Once Rachel saw his true self, she was disappointed. Even after she moved to another city, Thomas tracked her down and continued to harass her. According to Rachel, he became emotionally desperate when he found out she was with another man. Realizing that he could no longer win her back, he even proposed the idea of them continuing their relationship despite her new relationship. He suggested a love triangle, which Rachel categorically refused. After that, she said she began to feel constantly stalked, and Joseph had also mentioned it to her. One time, she and her lover saw something that looked like a camera flash through a backyard window, but they only realized the seriousness of the problem later. Thomas Dixon quickly became a person of interest to the investigators, and they wanted to speak with him. The plastic surgeon lived 2 hours away from Lubbock, and the police officers went to question him, as he was now the main suspect in the case. Dixon willingly agreed to talk to the police. He admitted that he had indeed been madly in love with Rachel and had made many changes in his life for her, including divorcing his wife. He did everything he could to stay with Rachel, but unfortunately, they eventually broke up, which was a heavy blow for him. Dixon confessed that, for a time, he had been stalking her, but not to threaten her, he claimed. Rather, he wanted to win her back. Despite his efforts, Rachel continued to reject him, and Dixon eventually gave up and found another woman. At the time of the crime, Dixon was in a relationship with a medical student much younger than him. He insisted that he had moved on from Rachel, was no longer pursuing her, and certainly had nothing to do with her fiancé's murder. Dixon's new girlfriend served as his alibi. She confirmed that he had been at work and later with her when the crime took place. Additionally, solid evidence, including video footage, backed up his alibi, showing that everyone connected to the case had accounted for their whereabouts, including Rachel herself. Investigators then sought out people who might have had a grudge against Joseph, envied him, or wanted to take advantage of him. However, no new suspects surfaced. Meanwhile, the lab results came back, revealing that the DNA from the bottle did not belong to Joseph. One of the blood samples found at the scene matched Sonier's, but the police database couldn't identify the other sample, meaning it would need to be compared with potential suspects to confirm guilt. The problem, however, was that there were no obvious suspects. A few days later, the police station received a call from an aspiring paramedic from Amarillo named Paul Reynolds. He claimed to live with a roommate who had recently confessed to the murder of Joseph Sonier and had attempted suicide afterward, but was saved. Paul's roommate was named David Shepard. According to the witness, the murderer told him how he had broken into the house and shot the man, providing details that were only known to a small circle of investigators, such as the use of the wine bottle as a silencer. An outsider could not have known these details, making it clear that David was indeed informed about the crime. The police quickly turned their attention to the new suspect. They discovered that David Shepard had a violent criminal history, which included theft and vandalism, though nothing too serious had happened so far. David was divorced and unemployed, but but had been involved in multiple thefts, including one from a prominent businessman. Paul described David as sociable, but somewhat incoherent, not making a particularly threatening impression. According to Paul, David had been hired by a plastic surgeon to carry out the murder, but he didn't know the doctor's name. A friend of David's, who contacted the police, reported that David had been in a depressive state in recent days, constantly drunk and under the influence of illegal substances. He behaved irrationally and seemed ready to take his own life. In this condition, the killer began telling Paul what had happened, and Paul decided to inform the police. When investigators came to speak with the new suspect, David became visibly nervous. He gave confused answers to their questions and appeared highly suspicious. When confronted with what the police knew, he gradually confessed that he had been hired by the plastic surgeon Thomas Dixon to commit the murder. David then laid out in detail the sequence of events from that fateful day. David said that he had met the plastic surgeon in a bar, and it turned out they had a lot in common, as both were going through difficult breakups with their partners at the time. Over a few drinks, they struck up a friendship, bonding over their shared experiences and trying to find comfort in each other. Thomas opened up about his sad love story, recounting how Rachel had left him and was now with another man. He explained that this breakup had deeply affected him, as he was madly in love with her and couldn't forget her. Dr. Dixon had made numerous changes in his life to be with Rachel, even planning to marry her, but she had left him regardless. Thomas was determined to get Rachel back, and he believed that to do so, he needed to eliminate the one obstacle standing in his way, Dr. Sonier. He believed that once Joseph was out of the picture, Rachel would come back to him. David sympathized with his new friend and agreed to help him in his mission. Together, they devised a plan, though initially it wasn't supposed to involve murder. Their plan was to defame Joseph by tarnishing his reputation, making Rachel leave him. The first part of the plan involved exaggerating the harassment claims from Joseph's ex-girlfriends and making it seem like Joseph was a terrible person. They even wrote a letter from a supposed ex-lover accusing Joseph of abandoning her, but Rachel didn't believe it. When this plan failed, it became clear that the two conspirators were prepared to go further to achieve their goal. They turned to Plan B, murder. Thomas Dixon decided that the only way to win Rachel back was to kill Joseph Sonier, as ruining his reputation hadn't worked. Dixon was convinced that after Joseph's death, Rachel would come crawling back to him. To execute this plan, Thomas needed David's help. As payment, Dixon offered David 3 silver bars, valued at around $5,000 in total. David agreed, and Thomas immediately gave him one of the bars as a down payment. David then took it to a pawn shop and cashed it in. He told the police how they prepared for the crime, with Dr. Dixon providing him with a gun. David's task was to follow Joseph, learn his daily routine, and figure out the best time to strike. He kept a close eye on the victim, and the plastic surgeon remained in constant contact with him, monitoring Joseph's whereabouts in real time. On the appointed day, David arrived at Joseph's home before he returned, positioning himself on a chair in the backyard. He was wearing a cap, safety goggles, and carried a bag. He waited patiently for Joseph to come home, armed with a gun that had a wine bottle attached to the barrel as a makeshift silencer, along with gloves and a knife. The gun was meant to be the primary weapon, but the knife was kept as a backup in case the gun failed. David also had a belt, which he planned to use to strangle the victim if both the gun and the knife didn't work. Throughout the crime, and in the lead-up, Dixon and David exchanged messages. This correspondence was later uncovered and became one of the key pieces of evidence during the trial. The crime, however, did not go according to plan from the very beginning. When Joseph arrived home late that night, he noticed an intruder on his back porch. He approached and knocked on the window from the inside, trying to get David's attention and scare him off. The would-be victim politely asked David what he was doing on his private property. In response, the intruder pulled out a gun and fired several shots at Joseph through the now shattered window. After that, David reached inside the broken window and fired more shots, but even then, Joseph wasn't killed. Joseph tried to flee down the hallway, and David, fearing that Joseph might have a weapon to defend himself, immediately followed him. He caught up with Joseph in the garage and began stabbing him repeatedly. After a few stabs, the pathologist fell to the ground, showing no signs of life. David then inflicted 3 or 4 more stabs to vital organs to ensure Joseph was dead. David rushed back to the car and reported everything in detail to his employer. When he returned, he immediately received the remaining 2 silver bars, along with a box of Cuban cigars, as a thank you for his work. Dr. Dixon listened intently to the report, treated and bandaged David's wounds from the struggle, and advised him to lay low for a while. Evidence supporting David's confession was abundant. For example, a photo accidentally left on his phone showed him posing in front of a mirror inside Joseph's house. Additionally, DNA samples collected at the crime scene matched David's, and location data from his phone confirmed that he was at the victim's house at the time of the murder. Dr. Thomas Dixon was arrested on charges of first-degree murder based on David's confession and a large amount of supporting evidence, including incriminating phone calls and text messages exchanged between the conspirators. When the police first questioned Dixon, they hoped to get a confession from the mastermind behind the murder. However, Dixon was visibly shaken and clumsily claimed that he didn't even understand which Dr. Saunier they were talking about. When the police pressed him with the evidence, Dixon quickly requested a lawyer. The case went to trial, with David Shepard agreeing to cooperate with the prosecution as part of a plea deal. He immediately pled guilty to being the hired killer. As part of the deal, he waived his right to appeal the verdict, and in return, he was spared the death penalty. Instead, he received a life sentence without the possibility of parole. Thomas Dixon, on the other hand, was much harder to crack. He continued to maintain his innocence during the trial. The prosecution charged him with capital murder, but chose not to seek the death penalty, likely because they believed the jury wouldn't unanimously agree on such a harsh sentence. Although there was significant evidence against Dixon, most of it was circumstantial. His defense team worked hard to paint a flawless picture of him as a well-respected professional with an impeccable reputation, both at work and in his personal life. The defense lawyers challenged David's testimony and even questioned the authenticity and relevance of the messages exchanged between Dixon and David. Despite the prosecution's best efforts, the jury ultimately found Dixon not guilty in his first trial. Much of the confusion stemmed from David, who, while testifying under a plea deal, appeared to favor Dixon, claiming that he had planned and executed the murder all by himself. 2 jurors from the first trial expressed reasonable doubt, leading to a mistrial. But the Saunier family didn't give up. The case was reopened, and in 2016, a new trial took place. This time, after reviewing all the case materials, the jury deliberated for about 3 hours before coming to the conclusion that Dixon was indeed guilty of first-degree murder. Since the prosecution had not sought the death penalty, Dixon was automatically sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. One of the key pieces of evidence leading to his conviction was provided by his own daughter, who presented damning information during the trial. Additionally, Paul Reynolds, who initially called the police, testified about how David had confessed to him that Dixon had hired him for the murder. Dixon's daughter also revealed that her father had tried to cover for his accomplice. Despite the overwhelming evidence, Dr. Dixon continued to claim his innocence, insisting that he had nothing to do with the death of his romantic rival, Dr. Joseph Saunier. Dixon was not satisfied with the court's decision, and his lawyers filed an appeal, which eventually led to the overturning of his conviction. Dixon was released on a $2 million bail, but the fight for justice wasn't over yet. In 2019, the state prosecutor's office filed a petition with the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals, asking for the reinstatement of the previous verdict. If the appeal was unsuccessful, a third trial was likely to take place. The prosecutor's request was filed on February 11, 2019, and the next phase of the legal process occurred in April 2020. During this time, Dixon's bail was revoked and a new arrest warrant was issued against him. The Texas Court of Criminal Appeals overturned the earlier ruling, reinstating Dixon's conviction. The judge concluded that Dixon should continue serving his life sentence without parole. Dixon is currently behind bars in a Lubbock, Texas correctional facility. Throughout all the legal turmoil and media attention, Rachelle, the woman who became the central figure in the conflict between the two men, sought to lead a quiet, peaceful life, staying out of the public eye. Although she remained in the same town, she kept herself shielded from journalists and the public. In 2016, she even filed a lawsuit against a magazine that had published an article describing her involvement in a love triangle with both the victim and the murderer. The article portrayed her as a gold-digging woman who destroyed marriages, which she vehemently denied. Rachelle sought $2 million in moral damages, but her claim was rejected. Despite her reluctance to make her life public, Rachelle spoke to the media on a few occasions. She expressed feelings of guilt for having unwittingly brought a criminal into the life of a truly loving and honest man. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to the channel and like. See you in the next video.
Today I'm going to tell you about a tragedy that befell the family of a Baptist preacher. It's a terrible example of how a true monster can hide behind the mask of a benefactor. This story happened in 2006 in the city of Waco, Texas. At that time, about 120,000 people lived there. Waco had a large number of believers, many religions, and accordingly, many ministers. One of them was a man named Matt Baker. Late in the evening of April 7, 2006, he called 911 and reported that he had found his wife Curry dead in their bedroom. Matt told the operator, "I think she killed herself." Carrie was lying naked and pale in bed. Her lips were blue, her hands were cold. She wasn't breathing, she had no pulse. Next to her was a note saying she was very sorry. When the police and paramedics arrived in the bedroom, they found Carrie lying on the floor. Matt said he tried to revive his wife, pulling her from the bed to the floor and changing her into everyday clothes. The paramedics could no longer help Carrie. The woman was dead. A note was lying on the bedside table next to the bed. Here is the text. "Matt, I am so sorry. I am so tired. I just want to get some sleep. Please forgive me. Tell Katie and Grace I love them very much. Tell my mom and dad I love them too. I love you, Matt. Forgive me for what has happened these past few weeks. I want to hug Cassidy. I want to feel her again. Please continue to be a great dad to our girls. Love them every day for me. Forgive me, I'm so sorry. I love you, Carrie." In the early morning of April 8, 31-year-old Carrie Baker was pronounced dead. Next to the letter, sleeping pills and open bottles of alcohol lay on the bedside table. The police had no doubt. The woman had voluntarily taken her own life. Matt and Carrie met in 1994. They were studying at the same university. Matt was 7 years older than Carrie. 3 months after they met, the young man proposed to her. Carrie's parents were confused. Why would she marry so soon a man she had only known for a few months? Carrie replied, "Matt will soon become a priest. What else do you need to know about him? Isn't this information enough?" The lovers married and moved in together. As is common among believers, the couple's first intimate contact didn't occur until after the wedding. Perhaps this was why Matt was so eager to marry Carrie. Soon after, Matt actually became a Baptist minister. The Baker family remained in their hometown of Waco. Carrie gave birth to 2 daughters, Katie and Cassidy. The woman worked as an elementary school teacher and taught special education classes at the church on weekends. The Bakers were described as an ideal family. They were religious and decent. But the fact that people tried to appear that way by no means meant that their lives were ideal. In 1998, a real tragedy struck the Baker family. Cassidy, Matt, and Carrie's second daughter was diagnosed with a brain tumor. At the time, the child was just 1 year old. Cassidy was treated and even recovered. But in March 1999, when Matt entered his daughter's hospital room to visit her, he discovered that the girl was lying unconscious in bed, not breathing. She had died. Carrie grieved the most. Later, she gave birth to another daughter, Grace, but the third child couldn't fill the void in her heart left by little Cassidy. Carrie regularly visited a psychotherapist who tried to help her overcome this terrible loss. But the woman simply couldn't get a grip on her feelings. There was still a black, painful hole in her soul. All of this led to the Bakers' marriage beginning to fall apart. The relationship between Matt and Carrie grew increasingly cold. After Carrie's death, Matt claimed that his wife had never gotten over the loss. Even the Bible Matt had given his wife bore Cassidy's name. Carrie suffered from insomnia and took sleeping pills every day. Incidentally, that evening in April 2006 was very close to a terrible date, the 7th anniversary of Cassidy's death. Matt said that Carrie struggled to get through that day every year. On each anniversary of Cassidy's death, Carrie locked herself in her room. She spent several days there, not eating, not speaking to anyone, simply remaining silent and grieving. According to Matt, late on the evening of April 7, he left the house and went to the cinema to rent a movie. He chose a light romantic comedy, then drove to a gas station and only then returned home. He went to the bedroom, about to enter, but suddenly found the door locked. Matt knocked, but there was no answer. Then he took a screwdriver, opened the lock, and saw Carrie lying naked and unconscious on the bed. He saw the suicide note and immediately called 911. Carrie's family, her mother, father, and sisters, couldn't believe she had taken her own life voluntarily. The suicide note had been typed on a computer and printed out. It was unsigned. Matt told everyone that Carrie was suffering greatly from her grief and that it was only a matter of time. Sooner or later, she would have done something irreversible to herself anyway. Carrie's family couldn't understand how she could abandon her beloved daughters and let her students down, as she loved her work at the elementary school, which gave her great joy and comfort. Besides, Carrie was due to start a new job in a few months. She was waiting for one to open. Sadly, the woman died. No investigation was conducted. The police only briefly looked at the Baker family's bedroom, took a few photos, and left. Carrie's relatives often met to discuss the tragedy. They talked for hours, reminiscing about Carrie and Matt's lives. One day, the family discovered something strange. Before their daughter's death, her parents had added Carrie and Matt's phone numbers to their phone plan and regularly paid their phone bills. This was a form of financial support. At the end of the month, they received bills, and the parents saw how many calls and messages Carrie and Matt had made. After her death, her mother and father noticed that Matt often called Carrie's number. Within 2 weeks, he made about 12 calls a day. Perhaps he simply missed his wife and wanted to hear her answering machine. That would have been a perfectly normal explanation, but it was far from the truth. One day, Carrie's parents came to visit Matt with their grandchildren. Mother and father immediately noticed that all the photos of Carrie had been removed. Matt was in excellent spirits, even though he had just lost his wife of 12 years. He seemed enthusiastic and full of life. When the parents asked for the phone, he didn't hide the fact that Carrie's number was now being used by another woman, a member of his Baptist church. Her name was Vanessa Bowles. The woman was 8 years younger than Matt. She had recently been divorced and was raising her daughter alone. Matt and Vanessa met at church and became friends. When Carrie's parents did their own research, they learned something frightening about Matt's past. It turned out that when Matt was still a university student, several girls had complained about him and accused him of sexual assault. When Matt graduated from university and became a priest, 2 parishioners also complained about him, one of whom was a minor. After 2 more complaints, Matt had to transfer to another church. It is known that Carrie always supported and defended her husband and believed that Matt was being slandered. Over the years, however, the woman began to doubt her husband and his honesty. Matt and Carrie's marriage did indeed fall apart, but not because of Cassidy's death, but because Carrie began to suspect that her husband had a mistress. She even told her psychotherapist. She believed she was in a hopeless situation. After the tragedy, Matt recovered fairly quickly and began appearing frequently in Vanessa's company. They told everyone that they were only friends, but this wasn't true. Carrie's parents suspected that Matt had something to do with their daughter's death. Mother and father filed a lawsuit in civil court, accusing Matt of wrongful death. The police began an investigation and found important clues. The day before Carrie's death, Matt searched the internet for information about a sleeping pill overdose. Carrie's body was exhumed and an autopsy was performed, but it yielded little information. The cause of death could not be determined. The only thing that was discovered was that Carrie's lungs were clear, meaning she hadn't choked on vomit or any liquid. The parents hired a private investigator and obtained a second report stating that bruises had been found around Carrie's mouth. She may have been given a sleeping pill and then her mouth was covered. Matt Baker continued to deny his guilt, claiming his wife had taken her own life voluntarily. He said that after Carrie's death, he began a relationship with Vanessa, which everyone immediately disliked. Her relatives were upset and went to court. The police summoned Vanessa Bowles for questioning to learn more about her relationship with the pastor. The investigator asked, "Have you ever had a romantic relationship with Matt Baker?" Vanessa replied, "No, excuse me, I don't mind talking to you, but you're taking up my time, and I have a very busy schedule." During the initial interview, Vanessa said virtually nothing, but the investigation continued. She realized it was a serious matter and, after several months, finally agreed to cooperate with the police. Vanessa met Matt at church before Carrie's death. At first, Matt just watched her from a distance and smiled strangely. One day he approached her and said, "Don't meet other men, just meet with your pastor." Matt smiled. Vanessa laughed back and said, "Yeah, sure." She thought it was a joke. Soon after, an event was taking place at the church where the congregants were just relaxing and chatting. Matt greeted Vanessa, invited her to a secluded spot with him, and asked her if she really wanted to meet him. The man also admitted that he didn't have any sexually transmitted diseases. He also had a vasectomy and could now go without contraception. Vanessa knew Matt was married and asked, "Have you ever cheated on your wife?" Matt laughed and replied, "No comment." The couple's affair eventually began 2 months before Carrie's death. The man told Vanessa that his wife was a bad mother and constantly made his daughters cry. He portrayed her in a negative light, called her fat, and said she was constantly depressed. Matt confessed to Vanessa that he no longer found Carrie interesting as a woman after she had become overweight. Matt said he wanted Carrie out of his life. At the end of February 2006, Matt and Vanessa had their first intimate contact at the Baker's house. Matt confessed that he had fallen in love with the woman. Vanessa recounted all this in court and complained about Matt, claiming he had exploited her vulnerability and made her believe everything he said. Matt told her quite openly about his plans to kill Carrie. Around mid-March 2006, he told Vanessa that his wife often took sleeping pills and that he could cause her to die of an overdose. Matt explained that he once mixed medication into a milkshake because Carrie loved it and drank it often. However, she immediately noticed a strange taste, thought the shake was spoiled, and didn't finish it. Matt also told Vanessa that he planned to sabotage his wife's car so that she would have an accident and die. Whenever Carrie was late somewhere, he would rejoice and imagine that something bad had happened to her. Matt told Vanessa quite openly what really happened on April 7, 2006, when Carrie died. That same afternoon, he bought pills to increase libido. They were capsules that were easy to open. He poured out the contents of the capsules and filled them with sleeping aids and a mixture of various crushed medications. Then he sealed the capsules and placed them on Carrie's bedside table for her to take, believing them to be libido enhancers. It is known that the Bakers drank alcohol that evening. Carrie took the fake capsules, while Matt drank the real ones to avoid arousing his wife's suspicions. Afterward, the couple went to the bedroom. Matt took out handcuffs for intimate play that he had recently purchased. He handcuffed Carrie to the bed and began to touch various parts of her body. He caressed her until the woman fell asleep. Then Matt kissed her forehead and whispered, "Hug Cassidy for me." Then he took a pillow and covered Carrie's face with it. He lay on top of her and waited a few minutes. Then he removed the pillow, thinking Carrie was dead, when the woman suddenly opened her eyes and took a loud, deep breath. Matt was startled and angry. He pressed his hand over Carrie's nose and mouth to ensure she suffocated. The woman died. Matt typed a suicide note on the computer, printed it out, and placed Carrie's hand on the note in case investigators ran a fingerprint check. Then Matt left the house to establish an alibi. He put on a movie and parked his car. When he left, he locked the bedroom door. The daughters were asleep in their room. At the time, they were 5 and 9 years old. Upon his return, he broke down the door and called 911. 5 days after the tragedy, Matt met with Vanessa and told her how he had gotten rid of Carrie. At the end, he added, "Don't tell anyone about this, or you'll bitterly regret it." He then sent Vanessa an MP3 file of a song by an American rock band called Dirty Little Secret. Matt really liked the lyrics of this song. He called Vanessa and reminded her again that he would be just as disappointed in her as he was in Carrie if she told anyone his secret. Vanessa continued to meet with Matt, but just 3 months after Carrie's death in July 2006, they broke up and had no further contact. Vanessa was the only key witness. Several emails were found on Matt's computer in which he told Vanessa about the poisoned milkshake. He wrote that Carrie had refused to drink the tainted drink. He wrote that next time he would add more chocolate to the milkshake in addition to the medication so that Carrie wouldn't be able to taste the bitterness. Matt pleaded not guilty and tried every means possible to justify himself by claiming that Carrie had taken her own life voluntarily. In January 2010, Matt Baker was found guilty. He was sentenced to 65 years in prison for the murder of his wife. For more than 10 years, Matt has been fighting for his release. In 2020, his appeal was rejected. He still refuses to admit his guilt. It is known that Matt was punished by his fellow inmates in prison on numerous occasions for sexual assaults he committed during his college years and while serving in the church. Thanks for watching, and take care. Her voice sounded confident, almost bold. In front of the cameras, she stood erect and held her gaze steady. Maria Fernanda Bonilla Archila, the prime suspect in this tragic case, assured everyone that she had the truth on her side. She demanded that the court consider her actions as acts committed in a state of intense emotional tension, not as cold-blooded crimes. But a recently surfaced audio recording called every word into question. This story began in the shadows of the tropical forests of Guatemala, where 21-year-old Melissa disappeared forever. She didn't show up for the party she wanted to attend. She didn't answer her phone. She disappeared, leaving only anguish, fear, and despair in the eyes of her mother, who transformed from a police officer into a woman desperately searching for her daughter. The body was found the next morning. Among branches and dry leaves, in a silence broken only by the sounds of nature, Melissa lay with traces of a struggle, strands of hair, and a branch in her hand. All this indicated that she had tried to fight back until the very end. This story wasn't just another case, it was a cry that broke through the noise of indifference. And now the justice system must respond to this cry. Melissa Alejandra Palacios Chacon was born on November 15, 1999 in the small town of San Jorge in the Zacapa department of Guatemala. She grew up in this quiet corner with her brothers and her mother, Anabella Chacon, a strict but fair woman who worked in the National Civil Police. Melissa showed a vibrant character from an early age. She was ambitious and charismatic. She skillfully combined tenderness and strength. Her brother was more than just a relative to her. He replaced her father. Her relatives described her as responsible, modest, and determined. Melissa dreamed of becoming an auditor. This wasn't just a wish, but a clear life plan. After graduating from high school, she began a technical degree program and had already taken the first steps toward earning a full diploma. But on July 4, 2021, everything came to an abrupt end. That morning, she told her mother that she would be attending her friend Cecilia's birthday party that evening. Time passed. The sun was setting, but Melissa didn't return. Her phone was turned off. This was unusual, as she always kept in touch. Around 10 a.m., the worried mother spoke to Daniela, one of her daughters. She told her that Melissa had sent a voice message. She and her friend were in another city. The car had broken down, but they still wanted to go to the party. The mother immediately called Cecilia. However, she received an unexpected response. Melissa hadn't arrived. This was a real warning sign. The young woman didn't disappear without a trace and didn't break her promises. Annabella wasted no time, went to the nearest police station, and reported her missing. The Isabel Claudina Alert, a mechanism used in Guatemala for the disappearance of women, was activated. In the following hours, her photo spread through the news and social media. Annabella personally visited hospitals and morgues to find any clues. There were no answers. Desperate, she called Cecilia again. She repeated the same thing. The young woman hadn't come. And then the next morning, a message came from local woodcutters. They had found the body of a young woman in a wooded area. When the police arrived at the scene, there was no longer any doubt. It was Melissa. Her life ended at the age of 21. Her body showed signs of violence. In her hands, she clutched a branch and a stone. These may have been her last means of defense. Strands of hair were found nearby, indicating that she had been forcibly brought to that place. It was obvious that she had resisted, but fighting evil alone is too difficult. Her family was in deep mourning. A public outcry ensued. People demanded justice. Melissa's gruesome fate could not remain obscured. Forensic experts determined that Melissa died of a head injury caused by being hit with stones. They also confirmed that there were no signs of aggressive harassment. The autopsy results indicated that the crime was brutal. Additionally, a characteristic mark was found around her neck, indicating that she had been strangled with a rope before being beaten. The experts' reports emphasized the particular cruelty of the crime and suggested the possible involvement of more than one person. This only intensified the outcry and increased the tension in the family's fight for justice. The Women's Prosecutor's Office immediately became involved in the investigation. One of its first tasks was to examine Melissa's private life. Investigators questioned her family to determine if she had a romantic relationship, but her relatives assured her that she had neither a boyfriend nor a serious relationship. They also investigated whether Annabella, Melissa's mother, had been a police officer and had received any threats. However, she stated that she had never encountered any hostility in her professional environment. Another line of investigation focused on the possibility that someone might have ambushed Melissa while she was alone and deprived her of her freedom. A key clue was a voicemail Melissa sent to her sister. In it, she stated that she was with a friend. This prompted police to investigate the young woman's circle of friends. With the help of specialists, the relatives were able to trace Melissa's last telephone contacts. It turned out that the last person she had spoken to was 20-year-old Maria Fernanda Bonilla Archila. Investigators immediately contacted Melissa's relatives to find out who this woman was. It turned out that she was a childhood friend of Melissa's, with whom she had been in the same class. However, as Maria Fernanda herself claimed, they had had little contact recently. Afterward, the police turned their attention to Maria Fernanda. They wanted to determine how close their relationship was and how she might be connected to the events. Melissa's sister, Daniela, recalled that when she heard about her friend in the news, she began calling everyone she knew, including Maria Fernanda. At the time, the young woman said she hadn't seen Melissa in over a year. However, shortly after this attempt to make contact, Maria Fernanda began actively contacting other family members. She expressed concern about Melissa's disappearance and even offered her help. They allegedly had a helicopter at their disposal, and as a pilot, she was willing to use it for the search. Her demeanor seemed compassionate and sincere, especially in this crisis situation. In reality, however, everything was different. The investigation revealed that Melissa had indeed left home to meet with Maria Fernanda. A surveillance camera on the facade of a medical clinic recorded the moment the young woman got into a dark car driven by Maria Fernanda. A man was sitting with her in the car. He was later identified as José Luis Marroquín Ovalle. The car was tracked by security cameras. It actually drove to the exact spot where Melissa's body was later found. The situation became even more disturbing when it emerged that Maria and her companion had driven into the forest where the crime was presumably committed. During the investigation, a surprising fact came to light. It was not the first time that Maria Fernanda's name had appeared in criminal reports. In September 2020, she herself became the victim of an armed robbery. She was known in the area not only as a well-known figure but also as the daughter of a former mayoral candidate in a municipality in Zacapa. Maria was known as a person with a strong character. She often emphasized her independence and said she was proud of her determination. The public followed her life closely, thanks in part to her connections and her activities in public life. Maria Fernanda was known in her community as someone who participated in air rescue missions and was considered by many to be a symbol of strength and independence. However, there were other opinions. She was considered a person with a dual personality, outwardly friendly, but with a dark side inside. Behind the image of a courageous and strong woman she created lay a more complex and ambivalent character. And at this moment, the investigation had to answer the most important question: why would Maria have decided to do such a thing to Melissa when they had supposedly not been in contact for a long time? The evidence gathered indicated that their relationship was much more strained than just a friendship. Although they had known each other since childhood, Melissa's relatives reported that this friendship was coercive and oppressive. According to them, Maria tried to control Melissa, and a conflict likely arose between them, which may have been the cause of the tragedy. Law enforcement used various methods, including analyzing social media profiles and reviewing Melissa's personal correspondence. A cybercrime investigation team was also brought in to gather further evidence and strengthen the case. Soon, the case took an even darker turn. It emerged that the crime had been planned in advance. According to investigators, preparations for it began several weeks before the incident. Melissa's last messages, as it turned out, were closely related to the correspondence between Maria Fernanda and José Luis. Their content suggested that the actions were deliberate and carefully planned. This discovery shocked Melissa's family. They painfully realized that what had happened was not an accident, but a conscious and cold-hearted decision. Melissa's funeral was held with large public participation. Dozens of people came to pay their respects and express their solidarity. People held banners calling for justice. The general mood was one of grief, pain, and demands for the punishment of those responsible. Anger at what had happened was evident on the faces of those present. Relatives and friends wore white t-shirts with slogans and released white balloons into the sky. This became both a symbol of farewell and a protest. They not only said goodbye to Melissa but also demanded that her story not be forgotten. For the relatives, the loss never ceased for a minute, and the slow progress of the investigation only increased the fear that the suspects might flee the country. In desperation, the family began posting photos and names of the suspects on social media. Despite warnings from the authorities that such actions could compromise the progress of the investigation, there was no official information about the suspects' whereabouts at that time. However, thanks to the family's cooperation with the public prosecutor's office and the active investigation, a lead was found. The suspects attempted to flee abroad. On August 25, 2021, Maria Fernanda and José Luis were arrested in another region of Guatemala, in San Lucas, Zacatepeques. Upon her arrest, Maria attempted to justify herself by claiming that she was not hiding, but was there for professional reasons related to her work as a pilot. Despite this, her behavior remained harsh. She refused to answer questions and stated that she would only speak in court. The investigation revealed that several people were involved in the crime. When Maria was charged, she denied any explanation, but the evidence collected and the experts' conclusions pointed to her direct involvement. 2 weeks later, on September 9 of that year, both detainees were formally charged with a crime related to an assault on a woman. The court ordered 3 months of pretrial detention while the investigation continued. At the beginning of 2025, the situation in the Melissa case remained tense. In February, Guatemala's Supreme Court decided to strip the first judge in the case of immunity after it was revealed that he had changed the defendant's elements and reduced the charges. Melissa's family also drew attention to the privileges granted to Maria in prison. They reportedly had access to a private vehicle, kitchen cleaners, and cell phones. In April, the new judge rejected Melissa's mother's request to convert the offense to a more serious one. This raised new doubts about impartiality. Family members claimed to have seen relatives of Maria Fernanda visiting the court at night and on weekends. There were reports of suspicious individuals standing guard near the courthouse, prompting the family to request that the case be transferred to a court with a higher level of security. The decision on whether to refer the case to a court for trial remained pending. In August, an administrative procedure was initiated against the first judge. It was investigated whether Maria or her associates had paid bribes. During the same period, the public prosecutor's office attempted to prosecute the woman for illegally using communication devices in detention centers, but she did not appear for the trial, citing her discomfort. The investigation was again delayed due to legal proceedings. Meanwhile, Melissa's relatives and friends organized street protests to demand justice. The public prosecutor's office also requested that the case be transferred to a special court, citing threats and bias. However, in January, the court rejected this request. The defense proposed a guilty plea in exchange for a reduced sentence, but later abandoned this strategy. The latest information on the case was received on March 12. The preliminary hearing was scheduled to take place that day. However, the hearing had to be postponed. The family's representatives requested that the judge be recused because he continued the proceedings despite the defense's rejection of the guilty plea. The law stipulated that the judge had to decline recusal in this case. The recusal was partially granted, and it was decided that another judge from the same court could hold a hearing in the coming days to consider the possibility of releasing the defendants. Maria, who was 24 at the time, was brought to court under heightened security. In addition to the police, she was accompanied by a private security guard. She wore a protective vest, and her appearance reflected determination. She claimed that she had not committed the crime intentionally but had acted in a state of strong emotional excitement. According to her, she was ready to accept responsibility. However, she did not consider her actions serious. She showed no understanding of why Melissa's relatives feared that she might be released. According to Maria Fernanda, she faced the justice system calmly, was full of faith and confidence, and believed that God had given her strength. She claimed that she was prepared to face the consequences of her actions and did not consider herself dangerous. She also stated that she had allegedly never lost in legal disputes with Melissa's family, including the proceedings before the Constitutional Court. The woman clearly stated that she pleaded not guilty. A few days later, however, a new audio file was made available to investigators. The recording, made shortly before the crime, was confirmed as authentic. In light of this evidence, the institution representing the interests of the police officer's family called for a review of the case and a new charge under a more serious offense. In particular, the audio recording and the correspondence between the defendants indicated that the crime had been planned in advance. An audio recording that makes your blood run cold. Statements that disappeared from the record. A judge who was replaced at the last minute. Almost 4 years have passed since the evening Melissa left home and never returned. The culprits have been identified, their faces are all over the news. Their names are on everyone's lips, but they are still not convicted. Until her last breath, she fought for herself, for her life, to be heard. And today her family is fighting to ensure that this cry is not drowned out by the system. When justice becomes a business and evidence a currency, the question becomes, whose side will the court side with? And if the friend Melissa knew since childhood did indeed plan the murder, what was the true motive? Envy, obsession, or something no one has dared to say yet? The case is not yet closed, but one thing is clear. Someone is determined to prevent the truth from coming out. And the worst may still be to come. Melissa's family continues to fight for the truth. After so many years, they still hope that justice will prevail and both suspects will receive the punishment they deserve. Thanks for watching, and take care. In January, a man wearing a hat, sunglasses, and 2 scarves entered a private clinic in Waipahu. 48 seconds later, he left the building, and 47-year-old John Tokahara was found dead inside. Despite the abundance of evidence, surveillance cameras, shell casings at the crime scene, and even the hat left behind by the perpetrator, this case proved to be far more complicated than it first appeared. Determining the killer's identity turned out to be an almost impossible task. Waipahu is a community in Honolulu County, Hawaii, on the island of Oahu. It is located inland from Pearl Harbor, and a sugar plantation once stood there. Today, tens of thousands of people live in the area. Just a few minutes away is picturesque Iwa Beach. On the morning of Thursday, January 13, 2022, the weather in Waipahu was warm and clear. At around 8 a.m., Lily Tokahara decided to check on her son John. John Tokahara, 47, had owned and operated his own alternative medicine clinic for nearly 20 years. The previous evening, he had told his mother that he would come over for the dinner she had prepared, but he never arrived. When Lily reached the clinic, she saw her son's white pickup truck parked outside. She entered through the back door, which was open. The front door, which faced Waipahu Depot Street, had not been used for 6 months and was chained shut. As soon as she walked in, Lily saw her son lying on the floor in a pool of blood. He showed no signs of life. She immediately called emergency services, but she was in shock and could not help him. It was already too late. Honolulu police officer John Minter was the first to arrive at the scene. He found a shell casing on the office floor. Later, 2 more shell casings were discovered, one of them beneath John Tokahara's body. The cause of death was a gunshot wound to the head. John had been shot multiple times. It was a brutal but swift murder. The repeated shots to the face suggested that the crime had been driven by personal resentment. In addition, approximately $4,000 in large bills were found next to John's body. If the killer had known about the money, he was clearly not interested in taking it. The murder appeared personal, although it had been carried out in a cold-blooded and calculated manner. John Tokahara was not married and had no children. However, he had a very close family and many loyal friends. He was especially close to his mother, Lily, and he was a loving uncle to his sister's sons. John loved the ocean and everything connected to it: fishing, surfing, and paddling. After completing his master's degree in Chinese medicine and acupuncture, he founded Tokahara Acupuncture and Health, which he ran on his own. His friends spoke warmly of him. During the years he lived in Waipahu, he became an important figure in the community. John's murder deeply shocked the entire community. It took investigators some time to piece together the fragments of John Tokahara's life. Despite numerous conversations with friends and family members, not a single clear suspect emerged. John was a respected man, and no one could suggest a convincing motive for the murder. Investigators began reconstructing the timeline from the evening before his death by examining John's last calls and movements. They found 2 phones on the desk in his office, both belonging to him. One of them was inactive and worked only when connected to Wi-Fi. As it turned out, this phone was used exclusively for playing Pokémon Go. The evening before his death, the app on that phone was opened at around 9 p.m. and was never closed. The phone finally shut down at about 8:45 p.m. when the battery died. It remains unclear whether John had actively been playing for hours or whether he was killed while the game was still open. Lily, John's mother, told investigators that she had last spoken to her son shortly after 6 p.m. He had sent her a message from his main phone to arrange dinner, but he never arrived. After 6:18 p.m., there was no further activity on his main phone. Taking that time frame into account, investigators collected footage from surveillance cameras near the clinic. The video showed a white Chevrolet Silverado pickup truck with Hawaii license plates turning north from Farrington Highway onto Waipahu Depot Street at approximately 3 minutes before 6 p.m. After making several quick turns in the area, the truck disappeared from view. A short time later, at a nearby intersection, a man got out of the vehicle and walked toward the clinic. He was wearing a light-colored hat, dark sunglasses, and a scarf covering his head and neck. He was carrying a brown bag. At 6 p.m. he entered John's office at the exact time the last phone activity was recorded. Only 48 seconds later, the same man left the building. No one else entered or exited the clinic until 8 a.m. the next morning, when Lily arrived. As the white Silverado passed the buildings on Waipahu Depot Street, investigators were able to photograph the front license plate. After image enhancement, the photo revealed that the first 3 characters were letters and the last 3 were numbers. However, the exact plate number still could not be determined. The pickup truck had no distinctive features, and there were no visible items in the truck bed. Even so, the vehicle became the most important lead in the investigation. Investigators began searching for matching Silverado pickups. They identified 53 white, 4-door vehicles, likely model years 2014 to 2016, registered in Hawaii with license plates matching that pattern. Investigators eliminated 52 of them through photographs, personal inspection, and by verifying the whereabouts of their owners. Only one suspicious pickup remained, registered to a 34-year-old former client of John's named Eric Thompson. Eric, who ran a successful construction company, had gone to John several years earlier for treatment of carpal tunnel syndrome. That was the only known connection between the 2 men. Eric was married to his childhood sweetheart and was a devoted father to their 3-year-old daughter. He did not appear to be a typical suspect. What possible motive could a young contractor have for killing a man who had once helped relieve his pain? However, when investigators began reviewing the messages on John's main phone, they discovered thousands of them. In a single month alone, there had been more than 5,600. The messages, exchanged between John and Joyce, were extremely explicit. They sent each other nude photographs, videos, and intimate messages. Their romantic relationship had lasted for some time, but it ended abruptly around 7 months before John's death, when Joyce's husband, Eric, discovered the affair. Judging by their correspondence, John was more emotionally invested in the relationship than Joyce was. He was the first to confess his love, and he repeated his feelings over the course of several months, from mid to late July. John tried to persuade Joyce to take the relationship more seriously so that it would not remain just an affair. Joyce, although involved with him, expressed doubts. She told John that she would continue seeing him, but she would not leave her husband. Over time, she became increasingly worried about the secrecy of the affair and the damage it could do to her marriage. In July, she wrote to John that Eric had discovered their relationship. Eric confronted his wife after she secretly left the house late at night while he was away on a business trip. He saw her leaving on the security cameras installed in their home. Joyce confessed to the affair and agreed to end the relationship with John. She and Eric decided to try to repair their marriage. Joyce and Eric Thompson had met at school in Kailua, east of Honolulu, and married on January 14, 2017. The ceremony took place on a neighbor's beach, attended by many friends and family members. The young couple later moved to Kailua, about a 30-minute drive from Waipahu. Together, they experienced important milestones in life: Eric's graduation from the University of Hawaii and the birth of their only child, a daughter, 2 years before John's murder. At first glance, their marriage and family life seemed almost perfect. Ironically, it was their desire to have a child that led Joyce to seek John's help in the first place. A former school teacher had recommended him, saying he might be able to help them. Joyce began seeing John to treat both infertility and back pain. After a difficult miscarriage, she and Eric tried everything in hopes of having another child. At the time, Eric believed John Tokahara was genuinely helping them. However, after their daughter was born, Joyce continued visiting John, and their relationship, as it turned out, developed into something more. Once these facts became known, both Joyce and Eric fell under suspicion. On the evening of John's murder, Eric Thompson left his home at approximately 5:20 p.m. in a white 2014 Chevrolet Silverado. The truck headed toward the highway. There were not enough cameras along the route from the Thompsons' home in Kailua to John's clinic in Waipahu to reconstruct Eric's movements completely. However, if his Silverado was indeed seen on Depot Street around 6 p.m., then the travel time fit almost perfectly. According to Google Maps, the trip took between 35 and 55 minutes, depending on traffic. If he left home at 5:20 p.m., it would have been entirely possible for his truck to appear in the Waipahu area shortly before 6 p.m. When Eric returned home at 6:47 p.m., investigators suspected that he had taken steps to destroy evidence of the crime. Less than an hour later, cameras captured a fire burning in the backyard of the Thompsons' home. The flames lasted about 5 minutes. Later that same night, Eric left the house again. This time, an object was visible in the bed of his pickup truck that had not been there before: a toolbox. During the search of the Thompsons' home, investigators found no direct evidence that conclusively linked Eric or Joyce to the murder. Instead, indirect evidence accumulated that could not be ignored. In particular, a wheelbarrow with a bucket in the backyard bore scorch marks, indicating that something had recently been burned there. Police also seized 12 registered firearms belonging to Eric Thompson and found 2 unregistered weapons. 2 of those firearms matched the suspected general type of the murder weapon. However, forensic testing later determined that neither of them was the actual murder weapon, which raised new questions about what had been transported in the back of Eric's truck during the second trip that night. Although more than 1,000 rounds of ammunition were recovered, the final piece of evidence had the power both to strengthen and to weaken the case against Eric Thompson. It was the light-colored hat worn by the suspected killer when he entered and left the clinic. As the shooter crossed the street near the depot, the hat fell to the ground. It remained in the street for about 10 minutes before being picked up by a random passerby. That passerby was eventually located. He was a homeless man who briefly wore the hat until returning to his camp, where he hung it inside his tent and stopped using it. After examining the hat, forensic experts discovered hairs on it. Samples were taken from the inside of the hat, the brim, and the top. The results of the DNA analysis were inconclusive. Eric Thompson could not be excluded as a possible contributor. On February 14, 2022, Eric Thompson was arrested and charged with second-degree murder and illegal use of a firearm in the commission of another crime. He posted $1 million in bail and prepared for trial. When the trial began in July, the prosecution focused mainly on motive, Joyce's affair with John, and on the manner of the killing itself, multiple shots to the head and face, suggesting a murder driven by personal revenge and anger. Prosecutors painted a picture of the ideal life and marriage that Eric believed he once had. They described him as a controlling perfectionist who had worked hard to build a successful business and purchase a $2 million home. When he learned of his wife's affair with John Tokuhara, he forced her to confess to her parents and apologize for her infidelity. The prosecution argued that, in order to reclaim his perfect life, Eric had to remove the man who threatened everything he had built. As long as John remained alive, Eric's world remained shattered, and so, according to the prosecution, he chose to solve that problem by killing him. Prosecutors also claimed that Eric tried to stage circumstances that would help him escape punishment for the murder. According to them, he failed only because of the relentless work of investigators who reviewed countless hours of surveillance footage. When it was Eric's turn to present his case, the seemingly solid narrative began to weaken. Eric stated that he had nothing to do with John Tokuhara's murder and had no intention of seeking revenge for his wife's affair. According to him, he had been shocked and deeply upset, but once he and Joyce agreed to work on their marriage, he no longer had any motive to kill John. He claimed that, although he had burned things in the backyard, they were simply useless items that had accumulated over time, and he had not been destroying evidence. He also said that the toolbox seen in the bed of his truck was an ordinary work item. Meanwhile, the defense tried to undermine the prosecution by raising the issue of other men who might also have had a motive to kill John. After all, according to the defense, he had damaged more than one family through his affairs. The goal was to create reasonable doubt in the minds of the jurors. The prosecution, however, insisted that only Eric had a true motive. His life, his marriage, and his carefully planned future had all been shattered. According to the prosecution, that was exactly what pushed him to eliminate John and regain control of his life. At the end of the trial, both sides delivered their closing arguments. The prosecution continued to insist that the evidence, although circumstantial, clearly pointed to Eric. They reminded the jury of the surveillance footage of the pickup truck, the timing of the drives, and the hat that could have belonged to him. The defense, on the other hand, focused on other parts of John's personal life to show that Eric was not the only person who might have wanted him dead, and that the case was far less clear-cut than the prosecution claimed. During cross-examination, the prosecution attempted to portray Eric as a man who continued trying to control his wife even after her infidelity. When asked why he was so strongly opposed to Joyce consulting psychics, he compared it to an addiction such as alcoholism, adding that she simply could not stop. The prosecution argued that this was yet another example of how he tried to strip his wife of independence and continue to distrust her despite all her attempts to make amends. Eric also admitted that, despite efforts to repair the relationship after the affair, their marriage still had serious problems. According to him, the prenuptial agreement he signed was proof that Joyce genuinely wanted to restore trust and demonstrate her loyalty. The prosecution, however, interpreted it as pressure from Eric to secure his own position in case another conflict arose. When prosecutors questioned him about the night of the murder, Eric offered explanations for his trips. The first time, he said, he had driven construction safety equipment to the nearest landfill. The second time, he said, he had gone shopping. He insisted that both trips were completely normal and had nothing to do with John's murder. The prosecution, however, pointed out that there was no evidence supporting his story, no receipts, no witnesses, and no surveillance footage to confirm it. As the trial neared its conclusion, both sides again laid out their positions. The prosecution focused on Eric's inability to accept that his marriage had broken down, arguing that this emotional collapse drove him to murder. The defense insisted that there was no direct evidence of guilt, and that the statements and evidence presented against Eric were circumstantial and left room for doubt. The final decision rested with the jury, who had to weigh all the arguments and determine whether Eric Thompson was guilty of murdering John Tokuhara. Throughout Eric Thompson's trial, many questions remained unanswered, which led to disagreement among the jurors and ultimately to a mistrial. Judge Paul Wong had to declare the trial unresolved because 9 jurors voted guilty, while 3 believed Eric should be acquitted. One juror later said that the main difficulty was the lack of concrete physical evidence. Many had expected to see something more tangible that would allow them to make a firm decision. But, as he admitted, the case was much more difficult than expected. After the first trial ended without a verdict, the defense expressed hope that the second trial would provide a clearer picture and lead to a more favorable outcome for their client. They emphasized that the impressions initially presented by the media do not always reflect reality and that the jurors had been able to see a much fuller picture in court. After the mistrial, Eric Thompson remained free on bail while awaiting the second trial and tried to continue with his life. However, as the case dragged on, his relationship with Joyce began to unravel. Under public pressure, constant media attention, and the lingering distrust within her family, they could no longer pretend that everything had returned to normal. Joyce, exhausted by the burden of the proceedings and Eric's constant scrutiny, unexpectedly filed for divorce. Her attorneys then introduced new information, a recording of conversations with a friend in which she expressed doubts about Eric's innocence. These revelations caused a sensation. In those statements, she said that Eric had never truly forgiven her and that his obsession with restoring justice had grown increasingly threatening. Public opinion became divided. Some believed Joyce was trying to save herself and her daughter by shifting the blame onto her husband. Others believed she was a manipulator trying to redirect suspicion. However, under pressure from the new evidence and the growing rumors about Eric's controlling behavior, the prosecutor's office decided to reopen the investigation. Thanks for watching, and stay safe.